Yeah, it's great to be here. Fundraising, yes, that's a big topic. So a lot of people right now tell you winter is coming, it's difficult. You hear a lot of tactical advice, right? And there was a time, I'm an old guy, I've been practically online since 1995, so I remember this thing that some people called the nuclear winter, right? So there was a time before when winter was really there. It wasn't just coming, it was there. And of course there was also, like some people would tell you today, with certain unicorns and certain, the whole debate, do we have a bubble, do we not have a bubble, late private companies being corrected downwards right now. Of course you had the same thing back then. There was a lot of stupid, idiotic stuff that went away in this nuclear winter. But there was also this thing that happened at the same time, something that then later was summarized under the term Web 2.0, right? And the interesting thing there is that in contrary to discussing whether e-commerce had already critical mass or not, all of a sudden there was an interesting shift that didn't come from the capital market, because the capital market lost complete interest in the internet at this time. But at the same time, there was a bunch of people realizing that the internet wasn't just made for big corporations to buy big Oracle licenses and then go basically one to many, that the internet wasn't a newspaper, that it was a two-way street. And all of a sudden, pretty interesting things happened. Then became social networking all of a sudden started happening. You had very interesting concepts like LinkedIn and MySpace, more coming from the intellectual side than coming from the money-making side, more thinking about what the internet was supposed to be. You had initiatives like Wikipedia. But then also, of course, with things like MySpace, wow, all of a sudden also investment was back on track. And it was because there was a bunch of people that thought about the big picture, and through that actually a new interesting breed of companies came. And why am I telling you this? Because I think the best way to go through a potentially difficult situation in terms of fundraising is to look forward and to keep the big picture in mind, because I think that still companies get funding that are, especially in this situation, I think if they're particularly innovative and if they're a part of a bigger change that is happening. And this is what happened then with these Web 2.0 companies. All of a sudden, for them, funding was definitely available, not for the consultant that did the 10th e-commerce copycat. So I think that we are underestimating, I think, the amount and the violence of the change that is ahead of us in the next 5 years. And this is because you've all seen this probably. We humans are really bad at estimating exponential trajectories, right? We are basically looking at what happened in the past, and we're looking at certain data points, and we're transferring them to the future. But the crazy thing is, even with all the dramatic change that we've seen in the last couple of years, meaning everyone having a smartphone in our hand, us having access to the world knowledge, everybody at all time, that's already pretty mind-boggling. But if you see here the trajectory from 2010 to 2015, the uplift, the next 5 years, it has to be even more radical. And the question is, where is this coming from? If you see how much time is going to be compressed in the next 5 years, you can go as far as saying we're on the edge of change comparable to the rise of human life on Earth. And you're asking yourself, what the fuck does this have to do with SaaS? But I think you're going to see that there is actually some pretty interesting, massive change ahead of us that has implications on the macro level, but also down to the micro level in terms of distribution metrics. Everything, I think, that has to do with your business potentially is going to be affected by this. And this next big wave, where is this coming from? One ingredient is this massive explosion of artificial intelligence. And I know you're saying, yeah, okay, the singularity is near, tell us something new, but take a step back and take in really how profound this change is. I mean, we've since the first computer, roughly you could say, our computer-like device in 1920, we've basically now reached the threshold of a mouse brain, and now we're only a couple of years away from going to a mouse brain to a human brain. And I found something that really, I think, makes this very clear. So this is Lake Michigan, right? And the volume of Lake Michigan in ounces, or in fluid ounces, is roughly the same as the brain's capacity in calculations per second. So as we know, Moore's law, computational power doubles every 18 months. So if you put one drop in Lake Michigan and you double it, and you have 2 drops, and then you have 4 drops, of course, at that rate, for a long time, you don't see the lake filling up. And this is 1940. So see what happens here. Nothing. 1970, nothing. 1980, nothing. 2000, nothing. 2015, whoa, shit, what happened? So we are now in 2016, right? So look at the numbers again. Try to see when 2016 comes up. Shit, what is happening there? So, I mean, I understand that raw computing power is not the same as artificial intelligence. There's very different concepts to get to general artificial intelligence, whatever. But raw computing power is definitely going to help with this, right? And we're already seeing it now with narrow intelligence and bots. Raw computing power itself is already a fairly big ingredient. So basically, we're somewhere there, right? So if this was 1965 to 2015, you know, it wasn't really artificial intelligence. We saw, you know, like decision tree-based things, like, I don't know if you guys remember these ELIZA bots and this fairly stupid parts of base things. So you say a keyword and it answers something, and it gets very predictable and boring after a very short time. Now we are actually entering a pretty interesting stage, and it's sort of the last stage before we get to real artificial intelligence. And when and if this is going to happen, of course, the predictions vary wildly, whether that's going to be in 40 years and 100 years. And it doesn't really matter, because then, you know, it's sort of extinction anyway. So, but until then, we are getting into an area right now where we have very interesting domain-specific real AI. So with deep learning, we, at least in certain verticals, can get to a point where it's pretty good. It's not general artificial intelligence, but we're getting there in terms of being able to solve human problems pretty efficiently in certain areas. So what does this mean if computers and bots can take over a large amount of the workforce? Let me show you this. This is, I forgot to put the source there. It's in an article I read about, you know, self-driving trucks and the future of transportation. This is a map of the US states with the most common job in each of the states. And as you can see, in the majority of all states in the United States, truck driver is the most common job. It's actually interesting. I wonder, does anybody know what this is? It's Hawaii, right? So in Hawaii, apparently it's cook. Which is cool. So yeah, except for some exceptions, truck driver is the most common job. So already now, we can do this, and I mean, we don't need to have the debate whether it's going to happen from a regulatory standpoint in the year 2020 or in the year 2015. A fact is that already now, technically, we could get most trucks off the road. Well, what does this mean? It means that not only the manufacturing and the dealer and all the jobs that are directly related to this, but especially the professional drivers, it will go away. It's not like, you know, so far we've been discussing musicians and journalists being disrupted. Well, the thing is, everybody out there right now who drives a car professionally is going to lose their job. And And not only that, but whole towns around it, people that cook, that work at rest stops, and all this is going to go away. And this is just the transportation sector, right? If this is the sectors of employment in the US, 76% are in services. This is call centers, insurance agents. All of this is also going to go away. Maybe not 100%, but a lot of it. It means that if you look at what's going to happen, is a lot of the knowledge workers are going to be either unemployed or self-employed. 80% of the people, even intellectual jobs, are going to go away in the next 20 to 40 years. So it means we're dealing with a massive workforce that's actually available. Well, this has implications also on who you can use, right? So, because this is two ways this can go. There's sort of the negative scenario, the bad scenario, where we have a majority of people who can't live off their work anymore, and we're going to have hyper-rich people that live close to the servers, and then you have basically the rest of people, and it's decoupling more and more and more. I don't like to believe in that scenario, because I'm a proponent of the good scenario, where we were going to have to discuss things like universal basic income, and we were going to have a lot of interest-based micro-work. If you think about it, right now, 80% of people don't work at what they're good at or what they love to do, right? We always hear this, like, oh, I wish I could, do what I really care about. And maybe in this room, in this group of people, that's a lot higher than 80%. And probably most people here who actually do what they like, but it's not the reality for most people out there. But a lot of people are very talented in certain things, and I really believe that we're going to have a huge workforce of people that can finally do what they're good at. That we're going to see almost like a hyper-renaissance where people can afford to work on things that don't necessarily provide basic income for them, because basic income is already there. Imagine the explosion of really cool stuff we're seeing when people are free to work on what they really want to work on. And this also means with the technology we have, there will always be someone out there who is exactly the right person to answer this question, or someone who's exactly the right person to translate the sentence, or someone who's exactly the right person to do some kind of micro work for you. I think that's the interesting thing. We have AI on the one side, but as long as we don't have general artificial intelligence, this is not going to be able to solve everything. But the combination with services that you can create of artificial intelligence and an available workforce of skilled and knowledgeable people out there that can do certain jobs for you. And I'm not talking getting pizza for you, I'm talking about doing research and things like this. That combination makes for very, very powerful services. And how these services will be accessed? Well, that's another interesting change we're seeing right now, and it's being talked a lot about right now. It's the rise of the messenger, right? I truly believe that that's the interface on mobile you want to talk with a service through. I don't think the app is really the right paradigm for mobile, and this is, I think, the change we're seeing now. So if you look at something like WeChat in China, it's not only basically an app store where you can add apps, and it's not just natural language. You can actually have other transaction, other interfaces, but within the canvas and the container of chat. But I think the interesting thing is that finally you can talk to a brand or a business on an on-demand basis without having to download the app in a natural way. So far, we have put the burden of learning an interface to the user. Onboarding, interface paradigms, it was up to you to learn it, right? You did the heavy lifting for me. Now it's with messaging interfaces, the interesting thing is it gets turned around. The person just speaks in a way they always speak, and it's up to the service to figure it out and make it efficient, right? Because of course, if you only have humans on the other side and not a mix of natural language processing in humans, then it's not a very efficient thing to scale. But for the user, it's exactly what the hell they want. It's just, hey, is there a table available tonight? This is what I want to ask the restaurant, and not download the fucking OpenTable app, right? So we're already seeing a glimpse into this. This is a service a friend of mine is designing right now in San Francisco. It's called Fin, and it's basically exactly that. It's not just sort of a concierge service, but it's a mix of intelligence on their side and humans to glue it together. He calls it artificial intelligence. So it's like a fake artificial intelligence. He tries to make as much as possible automatic, but then he also resorts to humans when it's about translation or research and these kind of things. And it's so cool. I don't know if you can see these examples, but you take a picture of a plant and you say, what's the big plant and its sunlight watering requirements? And then you get back the answer that it's a Strelitzia Nicolai, and the planting the watering requirements and where you can buy it. Interesting thing is something like this. Can you send Jenny a link to the Kanye interview from Vanity Fair? So, of course, in the background, this is going in your browser history, looking for this interview because apparently you have read it, right? Finding it and sending it, going to your messaging and finding Jenny, and probably the Jenny you're interacting with most because you didn't mention her last name, and then sending it to her. Of course, it's possible on mobile today, but it requires 3 or 4 apps. It requires context switching, and it's still a fairly inhuman way to interact with your device. It's just translating or basically transplanting the desktop paradigm to your mobile. This is actually how you want to interact with this device. And then if you add something like voice, if you already look at something like Alexa from Echo from Amazon with Alexa in it, or Siri, this is how you want to interact with it, and I think this is how we are going to interact with it. And a mix of human and artificial intelligence makes this possible already, and it connects interesting cloud services that we've built over the last 10 years. So all the SaaS infrastructure that we have, things like Google Mail, things like Google Drive, things like Calendar, things like Dropbox. Of course, this is all connected to it and feeding into the beast, so to speak. But you don't have to interact with it directly anymore. So this is sort of a next abstraction layer from, when you had the command line interface, the graphical user interface. I think this is really the next paradigm of interface, and it seems to be happening. So when you look at the current landscape of this, and this is where it becomes interesting, it's basically for the user it's all the same. But in the background, of course, there are huge differences in how efficient services handle this, right? So if you have the 2 axes from domain specific to general and from human agents to AI agents, and you have certain things like Alexa and Fin that are already fairly high up the axis. And then you have, of course, it's easier if you want to solve specific problems like buying a scarf, or think about banking. Man, I want this interface for home banking, right? It's like wire Jenny this sum. So of course, the more domain specific, the easier it is to use AI already. The more general, the harder it is to use AI. And then there is this territory on the upper hand where you have general artificial intelligence, where probably it's going to be pretty impossible to get to before we have general artificial intelligence. Why do I think this is a very new why this is a completely new paradigm? Well, so basically, I mean, pre-web it's pretty clear, right? You basically you have a travel agency. If we stick with the example of travel, it's very intuitive because you walk in and you talk to a human. The problem is, well, you have to go every time, and once you leave it, it's gone, and it's only available from 9 to 5. I mean, it's obvious. The downsides are pretty obvious, right? And then you get to the web. It's at least always available, but it's very unintuitive and unusable. With the mobile, wow, it's pretty cool because at least you always have it with you, but it has a lot of the downsides still of the web. I think with conversational interfaces, we are marrying what we liked about this with the always-on availability. So I think with ubiquitous availability, natural language interfaces, existing and accessible large data sets like Google Maps and things we can draw from, and the existing engines that are built on top of it. We are basically facing a near future, and this is not far away, where we have not only access to information, but we have access to actionable, to action from everywhere. We can get anything done by talking to a human from anywhere. It's like the ultimate superpower. I would like to call it the world operating system. And basically, this is what it will look like. And the interesting thing is, this is the new stack, right? You have the users, you have platforms like messaging apps, you have an NLP digestion layer, natural language processing that tries to understand what you say. Then it gets dispatched either to a human or to an artificial intelligence software bot, and then the software bot talks to existing engines like booking engines or your calendar or whatever, or a human micro worker uses the UI to get things done and do more complicated research. The interesting thing is this is a new stack with completely new opportunities, right? So think about where you fit in here. Maybe this will look a little bit different, but this is of course food for thought. I can't predict the future, but I think it's interesting to see where are you on this layer. Are you, for example, someone who would build an intelligent dispatch layer for these kind of services? It's a huge gap in the market right now. So it's not just we're just going to slap a conversational interface on everything. It's really thinking where you fit into the new stack. The good news is, in terms of distribution, it's going to get interesting again, because the App Store was not a great way of distributing your software. It was a closed shop. The web was actually amazing for distribution, right? You could hack yourself, you could do growth hacks, you could build on top of MySpace as a platform like YouTube did, you can do SEO, you have growth in your own hands. With the App Store, not so much. It sucks a little bit, because if you're not in the top 5 and you're not in this like virtual cycle of distribution, it's really tough to get there. And if you're in a category that people don't look for, it's even tougher. And if you don't have existing traffic, you can shuffle over. Difficult. Well, now we're in a new world with like bots that live on top of Facebook Messenger, and Facebook is going to announce the chat SDK. They're going to open in 1 or 2 weeks at F8. They're going to open the Facebook Messenger. The WhatsApp SDK I saw already. It's amazing. You have all these bots on top of Slack. Is this maybe something how you can present your service, where you can use everything you've already built, the whole engine you have, but actually don't go through the app distribution bottleneck and maybe bet on a new platform? Because historically, when there was a new platform like Facebook platform, a lot of new big companies got built because they were able to use a distribution channel, the window of opportunity to use a new distribution channel, and then of course everyone starts doing it and it becomes more equal again. But for a while, this is maybe a very, very interesting opportunity for you, but you have to act now. Because the implications might be, actually Google might lose its gatekeeper function. And in China, it already has with WeChat, right? I mean, not that Google is very, very important in China in the first place, but this might happen here too. If people discover services and interact with businesses through Messenger, Google AdWords is going away, right? Or it's losing a lot of its importance. So I think there's a lot of thinking about that you can do around disrupting certain verticals, using new distribution channels, and even sort of organizing micro-work. We've invested in an interesting company called Unbabel, and they do exactly this. They mix human translators with AI. So they have a bunch of translators that just turn on their phone like an Uber driver, and they get chunks of translation work, and then it gets sent back to them, and there's an initial AI-driven translation, and in the end humans reassemble it and make it nice. So I think we're only in the beginning of understanding where the opportunities there are, but as before, it's a bigger shakeup than the app economy was. It's a bigger shakeup than mobile. So I think you need to start thinking about now what it means for your business, and I think if you do, you actually won't have a problem fundraising, because you're sort of on the right side of history. I mean, this is the best way forward when times get difficult around fundraising, is to think ahead of the trajectory and trying to hit the trajectory with the shortcut of where you think the world is going to be in 1 or 2 years. Much better than reading blogs around tactics and how to pitch VCs and blah blah blah. I mean, really, I would always focus on this. Thank you.